We're now going to move on to this next session with Congressman Raul Grijalva, who represents Arizona's 7th District. As chair of the Natural Resources Committee, Chairman Grijalva has led efforts to bring traditionally underrepresented voices into the policymaking process. I'm going to turn it over to PopVox co-founder Roshna Chowdhury to moderate. Roshna, handing over the virtual mic to you.
Thanks, Melissa. Chairman Grijalva, hello,
good to see you.
Chairman Grijalva is here because he and his committee pioneered a really new process of gathering feedback from individuals, environmental organizations, and local and community groups for their bill, the Environmental Justice for All Act. And basically what they did was, instead of drafting legislation and then going outside the Beltway to get support from local community groups, they literally flipped the process around. Chairman Grijalva and his staff got community groups who really understood the issues and who were living with the problems that the bill was trying to fix in their own communities to get involved in the first step. So Chairman Grijalva, my first question to you is, last year, in actually June 2019, I had the privilege of attending this huge convening that you put together of environmental justice organizations. And what really struck me there was that there were groups from all over the country, and not the groups that you usually expect to be at these events, but real local groups that were representing people that were experiencing a lot of the pain points that the bill was addressing. Could you tell us about the thought process in convening these groups, and convening them even before drafting legislation?
Thank you very much. And Rashad and you and Ms. Harris, I want to thank you and PopVox for the opportunity to talk about this inclusive process that led to the creation of the Environmental Justice for All Act. I can genuinely say with all sincerity that without PopVox platform, that particular platform, our bill would not be where it is today. And the best example is back in 2014, I introduced an environmental justice bill. It didn't have the buy-in from the environmental justice community, and it languished because people didn't feel invested in it. And even though I thought I wrote the perfect piece of legislation, that the fact remained that I learned a lesson there, that the process, and particularly on a piece of legislation as delicate and as sensitive as environmental justice issue is, that we had to get the buy-in early. We had to be inclusive at the beginning, and so the meeting in DC was a reflection of inviting these groups in, laying out the process we were going to undertake, and go from there. Principles were agreed to, and again, the platform, PopVox was essential in that. We circulated the principles, came to consensus on it, and then from those principles, the actual writing of the legislation began. That legislation in its draft form went out on the platform again, and people responded. About 350 discrete and recommendations and changes to the legislation were proposed. Most of them made it into the final draft. So at every step of the process, we had the input of the communities most affected by the legislation, and also the participation of the working group. And I think we have a stronger piece of legislation, more national buy-in, and I think that an investment on the part of all these organizations that they had something to do with crafting this legislation. It was inclusive, it was transparent, and that I hope that leaders learn from our experience. I think the adaptability of this process from the ground up, legislating and policy development is something that could be of great utility both the individual offices as well as to committee efforts in Congress. And we've had a lot of inquiries, and I'm sure that PopVox has as well, in the interest that this kind of inclusive process, public process, has generated. So we're happy with the product, and we're happy with the process that got us there. All of a sudden, environmental justice issues were part of the discussion by the incoming president and vice president and his administration. It became, it's been, parts of it have been incorporated in the energy bill. Other parts have been incorporated in another piece of legislation. So we continue to push this forward, but we wouldn't be in the position of having the attention, and with that attention, a substantive effort to try to implement some of what is in the act. So it had to do with the fact that we had the kind of support outside of Washington early, and then the investment that this legislation was part of the creation of a community, as opposed to me sitting in my office and writing legislation.
That was a really great summary of the whole process, from bringing together the principles to drafting the legislation, and then including local and community groups in the whole process. So initially, when the convening was like the first big step of pulling together all these organizations to have a conversation about what those initial principles would look like, even before it became legislation. So what was the kind of response you got from advocates and community groups when you and your staff first went to them to ask for being part of this process? You've done this a lot of times, but this time it was distinctly different.
I think there was a general wariness about if we would actually implement what we thought the process should be and what we were recommending as a process. It was well received, but it's a wariness. You have to understand that many of these communities have been led down the primrose lane in the past, and that there's no consequence. I mean, there's no consequential thing that happens because of it, and so they have an absolute right to be to wait and to make sure that their buy-in and their effort is going to mean something. I think once we had developed a level of trust, for lack of a better word, then everything else involved in the process began to work. But initially there was some wariness, and the trust is earned. It's not automatically given, and especially if you're one of these organizations that's had to deal with environmental justice issues in their frontline communities, that wariness is justified.
And you also, just from working with you through PopVox, you and your staff had a lot of transparency in the whole process. So it was open for everyone, and everyone could read other organizations' comments and feedback. And that transparency in the process, I think also,
absolutely. I think you're pointing to a trust factor. That's probably it.
Yes.
That I think it did more to develop the trust among everyone than any other particular effort that we had in the process. I think that was key, and you zeroing in on that helps me answer the question of how the trust could have been developed. And I think it was developed because there was accountability on everybody's end.
And so you've been doing this for a long time. Could you talk a little bit about why it's so important to include diverse voices in the process more broadly, as perhaps a takeaway for people that want to replicate something like this in different policy arenas?
We all come to Congress rooted in some values and representing a constituency, and as such, when we get to Washington, that's the urgency that we come there with. Having been here a while, there's things that work toward making that, not making that the constant priority that one should have. And I say that because of all the pressure, the bubble that we're in DC. And so any mechanism that keeps us connected is important. And this particular platform has proven to be essential as far as I'm concerned. What I saw is the and what I experienced is that it was always after the fact that you wanted to go get the buy-in, and so you didn't have the public support and the public will pushing or opinion pushing pieces of legislation, simply because they weren't involved and they had no real investment in the issue. I think if on major pieces as we go forward on the reconstruction and rebuilding of our nation, once we deal with this pandemic, God willing, and come out of this dark period, I think that there's a lesson to be learned about how you involve the people that have been most affected in helping craft how we rebuild and how we recover. Same, and I think that principle of inclusion and accountability serves us all well. Not all the feedback we got on the initial draft was positive. Some especially around issues of cumulative effect and impact, were very insistent that that had to be key to the legislation, and they were correct. So we've learned a lot from it, but I venture to say that kind of acting on the instincts that we come to Congress with is a good place to start, and keeping that connection home is essential. That if I learned anything, that it's not only about getting things done, it's also about the security of knowing that you're taking positions into and promoting ideas that your constituents really want. It's a wonderful way to keep make sure that you understand the pulse.
That's a great answer, and it segues into my last question, Melissa. I hope we have time for one more. Is there any advice you would give to incoming lawmakers about this process? And if they're looking to replicate something like this, what advice would you give them?
To talk with you folks, to look at what, you know, it's public information, how we got to the Environmental Justice for All Act, and why it has the level of support that it does, and across demographics and across communities, from coastal communities. We just finished an online discussion with people in Appalachia regarding coal ash and the issues there, and the list goes on. And so I think looking at that is something, because but the best advice is I would say that you can shape your office the way you want, and I agree with my colleague who spoke formerly. Key positions, chief of staff and scheduler. I can't reiterate that more than anything else, but I think that as you set up your offices, that public component, that engagement component, how you factor that in, I think is really important. And we have the wherewithal now technologically to be able to do that and do it expansively. And so I would urge you, I think that that's so important, and not only keeps you in contact, but from within our own districts and outside our districts, are a great deal of talent and intelligence that can come to bear on pieces of legislation that you're working on or working with others on.
Thank you so much. It was truly a pleasure to work with you on this and with your staff as well. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.